Hello, and welcome to this remarkable Bull session for Red Bull Theater on Love is the Greater Labyrinth by Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz. I am Nathan Winkelstein, the Associate Artistic Director of Red Bull Theater. I am beaming into you from Harlem, Manhattan, on the ancestral lands of the Lenape people. The reading upon which this is based, which I'm assuming everybody in the audience has seen, but if not, you have until tomorrow at 7 p.m. We did it this last Monday. It is available on our YouTube page. There is also a Spanish version, the original Spanish version of this reading that is available even longer. That was done by Repertorio Español in partnership with us. Their director is with us today. And that is also available with English subtitles. Information for how to find that is on our website. I'm very much looking forward to having this conversation. A few little technical things. For those of you who are on the YouTube just watching, enjoy yourselves. I'm sorry you don't have the opportunity to ask questions yourselves, but I'm assuming at this point you know that. Next one of these, if you want to ask questions, just sign up for it and you can join us on the webinar. For those of you who are on the webinar with us, you can ask questions in the Q&A function on the bottom of your screen. And just type it on in there. We will see it. We will answer. You will not see other people's questions. So don't worry that you're shouting into a void. That's just the way it works. Also, we are offering closed captions for this conversation in Spanish and English that are being typed as we go. If you look on the bottom of your screen, you should have a closed caption option near your Q&A button that you can type. When people are speaking in English, the closed captions will be in Spanish. When people are speaking in Spanish, they will be in English so that everybody can follow along. I think that those are the bullet points. It's been since the spring, so hey, you've got to forgive some rust from the moderator, but I think I got everything. So we're going to get started. So let me introduce, we have a great panel tonight. So let me first introduce the scholars from the UCLA Diversifying the Classics initiative. We have Barbara Fuchs, Rhonda Sharrah, Aina Soley, and then we also have the directors of both our reading in English, Melia Bensussen, and then the Repertorio Español production in Spanish, Leyma López. Hello, hola. Thank you all for joining us. And I am going to immediately hand this off over to Barbara and the crew to tell us a little bit about why we're all here, because you are really we are thrilled to be here, but you are the instigators. So could you talk a little bit about Diversifying the Classics and the idea behind it?
Great. Thank you, Nathan. It's a huge pleasure to be here. I think this is really one of the highlights for us when we get to talk to the theater makers, because all of the work that we're doing really with translating these plays and is about trying to get them into that conversation with the theater makers. So we're just delighted to be here and so thrilled that we could pull this off. I think in the years that we've been doing this is the first time that we've really had a chance to put the plays in English and in Spanish in conversation with each other. And so it's really a phenomenal opportunity. I'm actually going to let Aina and Rhonda say a little bit about our broader project and sort of the context for this occasion.
Yes. Hi, I'm Rhonda. Barbara and Aina and I are part of the Diversifying the Classics project that started in 2014 at UCLA. So we're in Los Angeles. And the project is designed to promote Hispanic classical theater. We have several initiatives to promote that mission, including developing curriculum, hosting a theater festival, La Escena, and lately getting into making podcasts. But we're here today to discuss the way the project started, which is our collaborative translation workshop. So we translate one Hispanic classical play a year, and Red Bull actually did a reading last year of one of our previous translations, A Courage to Right a Woman's Wrongs. And this event is about our latest translation, Sor Juana's Love is the Greater Labyrinth, which Aina and I co-wrote the introduction for.
Yes. So this year we picked Love is the Greater Labyrinth to translate. And it seems that Sor Juana had a collaborator who wrote the second act, Juan de Guevara. And they often work together as co-authors. So it seems fitting that a play that was written collaboratively is also being translated collaboratively. And moreover, as far as we know, this is the first translation in English of Love is the Greater Labyrinth. So we hope that you enjoy or have enjoyed watching it, because we sure did.
Yeah, and you know, we have been asked also why Sor Juana, and some of you have heard me make this comparison before. She's sort of achieving Frida Kahlo super status, really, in the Spanish-speaking world. She's a really important figure, even for people who've never read her. And there's a lot of different stuff to read. You could read her sort of feminist manifesto. You could read her amazing love poetry, probably written to the vice friend, though we're not sure. Or you can read her amazing plays or watch them in performance. And there is a play by Sor Juana that is a little bit better known and that has been translated into English several times. La Casa de los Empeños, House of Desires is one of the titles under which it's translated. The play that we chose to work in has, as my colleagues were saying, really never been translated before. And so it seemed like a tremendous opportunity to put it before new audiences. At some point in the planning for this event, I think Jesse had the wonderful idea of trying to bring in Repertorio and really getting to see the two versions side by side, which creates sort of this amazing dialogue of styles, of language. And so we worked hard to also make sure that in both of the readings, since they were on Zoom, we could also have subtitles so that people could be sort of watching what the language is doing and what it might do in translation. So it's been an incredibly rich process for us, and it's really, as I say, Zoom does have its silver linings. I know Melia hates it, but for us, it's made possible this kind of collaboration with not one but multiple New York and East Coast institutions, and really the ability to bring all of this work together and all of these people together. So it's been very exciting.
I love that it connects us. I just miss being in person. Es lo único que digo, ¿no?
So I think I was going to start us off, and obviously when you start asking questions, you can ask questions about any aspect of the project as well as the specific plays. But since it's such a treat to have the directors here today, I thought that we would begin by also asking some specific questions about the way in which they brought this text into production. So I thought that I would start by asking Leyma about the particular way in which the Repertorio production was structured, how the Zoom worked with having some actors in the theater. I know we talked a little bit about the conditions in which you were going to produce it this time. I know you've done Zoom productions before. So I was just interested in hearing more about that. Si nos puedes contar un poquito más sobre cómo fue esta producción en Zoom comparado con otras que has hecho y qué elementos querías destacar en cómo la produjeron.
Bueno, primero saludos y muchas gracias por esta oportunidad. Ha sido una muy linda colaboración. Estoy muy feliz de compartir con ustedes en esta oportunidad. Bueno, en este caso, la obra de Sor Juana, cuando tomé la decisión de cómo iba a ser el proceso de trabajo para esta lectura, realmente tuve algún tipo de interés en establecer una cercanía con la analogía de, estamos en presencia de esta autora tan grande que llegó a escribir tantos y a tanta altura, que entonces ella llegó a escribir para recibir a estos nuevos virreyes que estaban llegando. Y entonces eso me inspiró un poco a la hora de traducir cómo quería llevar a cabo el proyecto, un poco también usando las herramientas que nos está ofreciendo esta nueva vida y manera de acercarnos al teatro. Y entonces pensé en la oportunidad de tener al rey en el escenario y que los actores desde Zoom le están presentando la obra a él. En este caso también el actor estaba desde Zoom, sea, no había una cámara extra, todo lo hicimos desde Zoom, con la maravillosa colaboración del equipo técnico del teatro, que me trabajó pues las luces y creamos el espacio que fuera adecuado para esto. También pensando en la audiencia, en cómo llevarle otro color, porque también como nosotros nos ha costado reinventarnos, yo creo que a la audiencia también le ha tocado reinventarse la manera de aceptar el hecho teatral, que en este caso no está siendo en vivo, sino que está pasando por otros tantísimos discursos que vamos investigando y hemos ido desarrollando durante toda esta pandemia. Y entonces, por ahí.
Yeah, so Laura is valiantly trying to translate, but I'll recap a little bit. Also, I think, as you were saying, Leyma, the fundamental sort of decision then is to have the king minus in the theater space, and then the fiction is that all of the other actors who are playing on Zoom are presenting the play to him, which I think is a lovely, sly sort of addition of meta theatricality, right, to the play, in making them all perform for him. And so for those of you who haven't seen the Repertorio version yet, though you should immediately, he's kind of in color, right, and all of your other actors are wearing sort of very simple black on white backgrounds and are sort of almost like in black and white, right? So that chromatic contrast is really striking. And I think it's also interesting what you were saying towards the end, right? That in part we're sort of working with audiences to understand this new idiom, right, of the productions that come via Zoom, and it's definitely a process. Yeah.
So I will jump in for the question for Melia. Melia, this is your second one with us, so I guess we liked you the first time, and for reasons that I don't understand, you liked us. So here we are. But because you also directed Courage last year, which is the first time we did one of these. Courage to Right a Woman's Wrongs is the full name of the play. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about, so of course for English actors and English audiences, the Spanish Golden Age is not as familiar a genre of play, and also not as familiar a style of performance. Sort of like we kind of know what to expect from a Moliere translation. We know where that lives. We know where Shakespeare lives. We know where Albee lives, but finding how did you go about finding how to bring the actors into the space and style required to deliver this sort of a text? Is something I'm curious about.
Well, it's been a pleasure to work with Red Bull and with this UCLA translating collaboration. Entonces, mil gracias a todos. Y Leyma, I'm like your fangirl. I love what you just said. Todo lo que has dicho me parece pero muy, muy, muy importante y me impresiona muchísimo. I think, if you treat every play as a new play, no matter what the play is, and you key into what the writer's tone is doing. Y Sor Juana, pero tiene un sentido de humor tremendo, ¿no? I mean, there's a sense of humor to the writing in Sor Juana that you feel there's certain lines that give you her tongue-in-cheek, that give you her sense of theatricality. I am, of course, going to steal Repertorio's idea of presenting it before the king. I think that's just fabulous. But it's really that sense of how do you embrace the wit within the text? How do you free actors from what I call the Mona Lisa syndrome, where they put a classic behind panes and panes and panes of glass, and they don't feel that they can really be themselves within the text? And the wonderful thing about the company that Red Bull assembled, with a huge thank you to you, Nathan, as one of our casting gurus on this production, but is that you get a group of brilliant actors who know how to read a play and have, even though they may not have read Sor Juana o Calderón o López de Vega, y que eso es una lástima y bueno, otra conversación, but even though they haven't read that, they know Shakespeare, they know Moliere. The fact that they know those things really aids because all these texts have so many commonalities These are folks writing in around the same period with a lot of the same theatrical vocabulary. So it becomes really fun to talk about allusions to other playwrights while also celebrating the wit within the text. So it's not that hard, really, right? Or it didn't feel that way. And Barbara and Aina, you were both in rehearsal, estaban con nosotros ustedes, entonces les pregunto a ustedes también, right? But the sense of energy in the script really comes through to experienced actors. They see the wit. They see the really, in a sense, the meta theater thing that Sor Juana does, right? Because Sor Juana comments within the play on her own theatrical devices, which I just love. But
yeah, there's this in this text in particular, right? I think there's such a playfulness about sort of setting something up with great formality and then dismantling it, right?
Right. I mean, you basically, right. I mean, you get the lines. I'm trying to remember which play, over to all of you brighter people, if this were played upon a stage, right, we would not believe it. And in fact, Sor Juana uses that same sort of vocabulary of, oy, if these were actors, we wouldn't buy it. So it's just so much fun to do because it's so smart and so self-aware.
Yeah,
So I was just going to say I would normally hold off, but that feels like such a brilliant transition to bring the couple of actors that we have into the space.
Oh, let's bring on the brilliant actors.
Yes,
the brilliant transition.
And since none of the brilliant actors were able to show up, we got, no, I'm kidding. Timothy Stickney and Anita Castillo Halverson, who are both.
No, he's gonna cut your head off, Nathan. I mean, this is, T minus. Really. Watch out.
You're testing this, man.
Yeah. Well, thank you both for joining us. And I guess I would love, actually, first let me send my traditional 15 minutes in reminder to attendees that this is a Q&A. So please do write questions in the Q&A at the bottom, and we will definitely answer them. But in the meantime, we're happy to keep asking ourselves. And so let me sort of, I mean, you've heard what Melia said about attacking this script. How did either one of you can jump in, find approaching this script to be unique or not unique compared to other classical texts or other texts of any kind?
Well, the first thing that comes to me is that the main event in my mind, and I mean, we really got confused in rehearsal. What happened to the labyrinth? The fact that this play takes on this monumental piece of mythology and then says, and that's off stage. And I do wonder, it does make me wonder what happens if, we do it off of Zoom, God forbid. But and I mean, the UCLA folks have talked about, would there be a shadow play of the getting out of the labyrinth? What would happen? But the fact that that is not the play is huge, and that's the first thing that comes to me. Figuring out the drama everywhere else.
Well, I was more along, as you all were saying, that it's this text that in an odd way, because hadn't been exposed to it, does speak to the playwrights that I am familiar with. So I've been doing those plays, I guess, working with those writers just long enough that I'm used to just kind of throwing myself in. So on the first read, I could hear a slightly different music, and that it was asking to be larger than mundane. I mean, and I'm looking at Minos, so, I was like, okay, I'm all wrath, I'm all fire. Okay. I can do that.
And you did it very well. You were very wrath and fire. But you did connect, Timothy. That's absolutely right. You connected to other works.
And then just trust that we were in the right area. I mean, I trust Melia. So she gave us encouragement. And, even Minos has those couple of moments, the meta moments, where he I think they were more in the silences, aware of the humor that was going on around him, because he's not telling really any jokes. So it was fun to occupy that space and then get to watch the premiere and really see let myself enjoy the humor that was going on around me. But I have found another writer whom I really love, and so I'm looking forward to more translations, because my Spanish, I took enough of it in high school to realize that it's terrible. So I need the help. But it was really a joy to hear someone else's humor about the similar period and nobles and all the rest of it.
We do, oh boy, rookie mistake. Two hours in and forgets to unmute. Brutal. We do have a question in the chat, so we got 50% of the way there. If you could put the questions in the Q&A, it will be just easier for me to track. I might miss them in the chat. But Carol Lashoff was asking whether or not Sor Juana would have been familiar with the plays of Shakespeare. I open that to anyone who knows that answer.
I'll take a stab at it. I think most probably not, because Shakespeare's sort of reputation in Spain comes much later. She's, I would say, sort of deeply schooled in all of the, really by that point, generations of Spanish playwriting before her, where, this has been such the central kind of public art form in Spain for almost 100 years by the time Sor Juana is writing. And so there are really thousands of plays by that point. And in fact, we know that in the House of Desires, the Trials of a Noble House, however you want to translate that one, she's very specifically rewriting a Calderón play. And so she shows that she has sort of read that very carefully. And in general, it's one of the ways in which this corpus gets very rich. There's a lot of dialogue between the plays. And it's interesting, this is something that we pointed out in the play we did last year as well, in Anacaro, a kind of, particularly in a female playwright, almost show-offiness, I can do this, I can do that, I can do Calderón, I can do, and so there, I don't think that Shakespeare is the referent, but I think they're deeply embedded in a playwriting tradition. And so these conventions of comedy and doubling and mistaken identities and the dark, Sor Juana loves the dark, those are very, very familiar to them. They've got the sort of techniques of this down.
I love that you say that, because I did see so many connections between Anacaro and Sor Juana, right? And I owe you all a great debt, because I'm so appreciated working with these plays. But you do start to see, it's almost like you feel you could have a glossary of theatrical conventions of this period, yeah?
Absolutely, and I think that's also why the characters start referring to them. Maybe Aina, Rhonda, you can remember the exact line, but there's the moment when the second princess shows up, and when I think it's one of the servants says, "Oh, this is the second act of this comedy," and everything happens in doubles. It's something like that, right? And so there's the characters themselves, right? Are voicing this knowingness about the conventions and the tradition, and this meta theatricality becomes incredibly rich, because it's also often the place where characters will reflect on the scriptedness of their social roles, right? So where Vinny says, I've been here the whole time and I didn't get a single line, right? Like, this is what it means to be a servant on stage, right? And so there's a lot of
I love that, right? I mean, that's a great moment, because there is this, I've been here all through and I don't have anything to do. And there's an acknowledgement of what it's like. They speak as theater makers in a way that, right, that not all playwrights do. And that does speak, it connects us to Shakespeare in our contemporary, very Anglo tradition, but that sense of understanding what an actor's experience is through a production's journey.
It almost felt like it was a moment that was created in the rehearsal space.
It
I know
did,
that
it did.
Yeah,
And it sort of
like-
takes you back and you go, oh, look. And we had a very gifted actor who really connected to what it means to feel as an actor to be on stage for X number of pages and not have a line. It's just brilliant of her to write that.
But I think
Yeah.
it's also interesting to think about how those cues in the text might lead to a production decision like Leyma's, como esas pistas en el texto también te pueden llevar a enfatizar lo metateatral, ¿no? Because the text itself is giving you these cues about, everyone in a sense performing, de que todos ya están representando, ¿no?
So we have sort of a, I would say this is almost a follow-up question from Arthur White, he's saying that the second act has a lot of similarities to Shakespeare's comedies, Lovers in the Forest, Mistaken Identities, etc. And we did just talk about how the Spanish plays have a long kind of history of their own. Does the fact that there are similarities between these styles, is that just an example of parallel evolution because that's what's funny? Or are they both drawing from are both Shakespeare and Sor Juana and the Spanish Golden Age drawing from tropes from even earlier?
And somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I know at least the Spanish tradition is drawing on the Commedia dell'arte, and the English tradition, I think, also had some influences from that. So a lot of times when people hear Commedia, when they hear the Hispanic plays that we're working on, they think of Commedia dell'arte, but it's not the same thing, but it was definitely influenced in some of the humor and the physicality and things like that, I think, is definitely evidence of that. Well, I was going to say also that I just wanted to mention that the English playwrights of Shakespeare's time definitely knew of Spanish plays, and they were adapting them and they were using them as sources. And that is another way of thinking about kind of a flipped hegemony of who is influencing who. So the shared heritage can also go the other way. And then playwrights in England did know of some of the Spanish playwrights that Melia has mentioned, and some of the ones that we've also translated in the group. So the shared vocabulary can come many ways, also from the sources. So this play is about mythology, but there's also various kinds of, novellas and various things that they were all kind of circulating and drawing on at the time. So the connections were probably something underappreciated today versus the separations.
Yeah, so we have plays in parallel, English and Spanish plays that draw on the same source story. There's a López Romeo and Juliet play that we had an event on a few months ago. There's a López Duchess of Malfi play. So there's definitely those in parallel, and there's definitely English plays, like especially Fletcher, taken from Spanish sources. We don't, as far as I know, have Spanish plays based on English sources because that was not the vector of cultural influence in the period. And that's sometimes really hard for contemporary audiences to fully understand because the dynamics are so different for us today.
Thank you. We have now the question, it always happens this way. Now the questions are flying in. There's a couple of questions about the language that I think it would be good to address. An anonymous attendee asks, says the translation is very colloquial, very contemporary, which I actually personally maybe question that assumption. But does this represent an aspect of the text itself, or is it an insertion by you all? So I guess the way I would phrase that is, was Sor Juana contemporary for her time? Was she making new norms? Was she oddly unversed, sort of the way that Shakespeare broke heroic verse and went into free? Was that something Sor Juana did, or was that a choice by the Diversifying the Classics initiative in the translation process?
So actually, this particular play had some really complicated and baroque sections, really long speeches. So this play in particular, it's not very colloquial, not even at her time. I think Barbara mentioned before that Sor Juana was showing off, and she was showing off in, every single sense she could. So she would write these really long speeches where she would show off her ability to rhyme and like her extensive vocabulary. The play, as the attendee mentioned, it's in a more colloquial register. It's written in contemporary English, even though we try to maintain sometimes a higher register, so it's in character for the characters. However, the reason we do that is Lope de Vega, one of the most famous and proficient Spanish dramaturgs, playwriters, wrote in El Nuevo Arte de Hacer Comedias, the new art of making comedies. He wrote, you should do whatever is entertaining for your audience. So what we want to do with our translations is to make sure that we entertain the audience. So that's why we try to write them without losing, the DNA from the original, to write them in a more contemporary register and try to get the jokes to read well for a contemporary audience.
And I just want to commend all of you, because the lack of preciousness around translation is so crucial here. Timothy and Anita, you two can speak to this. There was a lot of flexibility as we were working, as brief as our period was of rehearsal, but to sort of say, Barbara, Aina, can we change this? This sentence doesn't work. Can we cut this? Can we do this? So that, right, because translation is an act of adaptation, even when you don't want it to be, right? There's no way to be a literalist and have it work.
Yeah, David Ives refers to them as transladaptations.
Right, well, what's the Italian? Barbara, you'll be better at this than I am, but isn't there
there's a famous,
betraying and translating as a similar verb, which means a lot to me, because there's no way not to.
Yeah, so, one thing that we do is we really try to give directors and practitioners the entire text, because we feel those are not decisions for us to make, and then encourage them to slash away at it and really cut whatever they need to cut, and make the changes they need to do to make it work in production. I also think that for us, it's really a partnership, so that this part of the process where we hear it read or we see it performed is an opportunity for us to refine the translation, because, if a line is tripping you up, Anita or Timothy, then it's not a good line, right? And if a speech is too cumbersome to get through, it's not we need to do more work on it. And so, I have from sitting in on rehearsals, I have, pages and pages of notes of things that we will tighten and, slightly modify and so on, so that the next time it gets done, it'll be stronger. And one of the things, we are publishing the translations, but we also keep PDFs up on our website that are available for everyone. And the idea is that, we might keep fiddling with them, as we see another reading and there's another line that gives someone trouble, or another reference that seems like it needs a better solution. So we see this as a very alive process, and entirely in the service of performance, right? That's the point, that they work on stage, even on Zoom stage.
Great. We have so many. This is one that I'd love to, Barbara, if you could maybe translate for me, because I think this would be a good one for Leyma. Starts with a compliment. This from Jim. We'll go with I apologize. I do not speak Spanish, but I found the Spanish version totally enthralling. I'm enough of a Shakespearean to understand the difference between the early modern English of Shakespeare and the English we speak today. How far is Golden Age Spanish from the Spanish spoken today?
Sí, básicamente pregunta qué distancia hay entre el español del teatro del siglo de oro y el español que hablamos hoy en día, de una persona que nota la distancia entre el inglés de Shakespeare y el de hoy.
Perdone. Bueno, la diferencia es muy amplia. Estamos hablando de un lenguaje ya antiguo, un lenguaje poético donde el entendimiento del verso y la comprensión de la palabra es realmente muy importante para poder acercarnos a la audiencia de hoy. Y entonces yo creo que ahí es donde está el reto mayor cuando abordamos este tipo de literatura, en tratar de comprender, desentrañar realmente lo que nos está diciendo la autora para poder encontrar códigos de comunicación, códigos tanto en nuestro lenguaje para llegar a la audiencia, porque la diferencia es sumamente amplia. En el día de hoy, a veces nosotros dejamos de decir la palabra completamente y lo podemos hacer con un código de lenguaje X, las palabras las podemos cambiar y manejar. El lenguaje tanto ha ido evolucionando como haciéndose de otra manera, como creándose según pensamos, según vamos viviendo, y hay una modificación completa en la palabra. Entonces, el reto realmente creo que está en esa comprensión realmente de lo que se está diciendo en ideas completas, no tratar de entender exactamente palabra a palabra, sino ser capaces de comprender desde el proceso de creación, desde que comenzamos los ensayos y empezamos este trabajo de mesa, tratar de entender la idea completa general, lo que nos está diciendo la autora, para poder traducirlo luego y llegar a nuestro público de hoy. O sea, creo que son textos muy importantes que no debemos dejar pasar por alto, tanto en inglés, en español, Shakespeare, López de Vega,
Claro.
son textos que tenemos que luchar porque se sigan escuchando, porque se sigan haciendo. Creo que esta colaboración tiene esto de exquisito, y es el hecho de haber podido llegar a la audiencia de habla americana, que no entienden nuestra lengua. O sea, que ahí creo que Bárbara y todo el equipo y Red Bull, creo que esto ha sido maravilloso en ese sentido. Es una manera de crecer, de llegar a más público, de alguna manera, nuestras grandes historias del siglo de oro.
Yeah, thank you, Leyma. So again, I'm going to...
Sorry.
Oh, no,
go ahead, Barbara.
I was just going to recap a little bit because, again, I'm feeling for Laura. So Leyma points out that it is a very different Spanish, although I would say it's not as far from contemporary Spanish as Shakespeare is from English, which is good as translators. And it's also very
That was going to be my question, is what's the relationship, right, between how far the Spanish is? Es como Shakespeare, es como Chaucer?
It's actually closer. I would say it's like, 100 years. It has 100 years on Shakespeare, so it's closer. But
Sheridan?
it's verse. It's
yeah. Like Sheridan,
yes.
Maybe?
Yes. But it's in verse, and it's very tightly wound up verse. So there's a lot of unpacking you have to do. And what I thought was amazing in what Leyma was saying is she was really emphasizing the need for the actors both to understand the general idea of what they were saying and get that right, and then also to think about the codes they're going to use to communicate and how those might be different for us today and how they might rely on those. Te quiero decir, Leyma, que me pareció increíble lo lúcido del verso. I want to congratulate Leyma on how amazing, given that no one has a lot of rehearsal time for Zoom readings, right? How amazingly clear it was that your actors knew what it was saying. Because as translators, I mean, this text is easily the hardest one we've translated. It's very, very Baroque. It's people talking at court and not even wanting to be understood in many cases, right? And then the actors have to understand what they're saying and get the audience to understand that. And I thought it was remarkable how kind of limpid the understanding was, because, it worked that way in the English too, but which is, I think, also a testament to the quality of the acting, but we bend over backwards to make the English more accessible, right? We're not going to translate the difficulty where we don't need to. So it's just been fascinating to see the back and forth of that.
There's a follow-up. There's a question that I think makes sense to fit in here from Kira Curtis. It's quite long, but I'll read it. I think it's worth reading, which is that she watched both, and there's a difference of performance style between the two versions. The English seemed to be much more physically expressive compared to the more static approach of the Spanish version. She's hypothesizing that has to do with sort of putting the lyrical Spanish language of Sor Juana first for the Spanish actors, but she's asking if this came up in rehearsal. or if we think that this is actually a difference between Spanish and English traditional styles of acting. Is it something that's done naturally, perhaps for English-speaking actors to bring it forward to something we see more like Shakespearean comedy? I just think that's an interesting one for the room.
Great
again, about the
question.
different deliveries and why they might happen.
Leyma, no sé lo que piensas tú, ¿no? Porque me parece una pregunta muy interesante. It seems so interesting to me to sort of think about that. Is that our actors' stylistic backgrounds? Is it an assumption about translation versus original language? I really don't have the answer. I love the question. We did also have actors, and Timothy and Anita, I defer to you two as well here, that were very interested in the physical life of this play and in the physical comedy of it. So I don't know how much. I would also throw, Nathan, that it's a little bit, is that Red Bull style, right? I mean, there's so many factors here. It's a Red Bull reading versus a Repertorio reading versus, you know, there's no control group, if you know what I mean. We don't really know what it is, if it's the language or the energy. I know that I am very conscious that theater is not, and this is, as Barbara said before, that I have issues with Zoom, so apologies to all. I've just been desperate to really be in person and live. So Barbara's maybe heard me whine too much, but that there is, for me, a theatricality, a need for the voice to connect with the body in this work. And maybe in part when the text feels more quote unquote foreign, y lo digo así, no porque no debería ser así. It shouldn't be foreign, but it is foreign. So is there a way through physical work, through an actor's embodiment of tone, does it help get rid of, as I was saying, this Mona Lisa thing of, oh, that's a play from far away and it has nothing to do with me, as opposed to I'm allowed to laugh, I'm allowed to feel. Pero ¿qué piensas tú, Leyma? No sé.
Yo creo que en esencia el lenguaje es tan amplio y hay tantas posibilidades de mirar y atacar esta dramaturgia enorme que entonces un poco como que empieza a nacer un diferente color cuando lo abarcas y de la manera en la que los creadores nos acercamos pues a este lenguaje, de qué manera lo vamos a atacar. Yo vuelvo y regreso a mi idea, porque privados de la acción, que la acción puede esclarecer tanto a la hora de llevar este tipo de textos, el foco de la comprensión y de la manera en la que lo estás viendo. En este caso en particular, y es lo que pasa, en mi entendimiento son personajes de la mitología griega, o sea, son personajes que ya están hechos, son personajes que conocemos su sino de antemano.
Pero que de veras no conocemos. Ajá. La cosa también es que no los conocemos, pensamos que los conocemos, pero no sabemos nada.
Hay una amplitud y es tan poderoso eso mismo que se empieza a crear a la hora de acercarte, cómo lo vas a atacar, cómo lo vas a hacer. También un poco yo investigo a la hora de trabajar en este nuevo experimento por acá, trabajar la neutralidad, el actor vivo, el actor diciendo, el actor conectando, comunicando, que haya una conciencia en la palabra, el actor está de pie, o sea, trato de llegar a la neutralidad en esencia, porque quiero poner el énfasis en ese actor que nos está comunicando en este nuevo lenguaje, cómo acercarnos a él. Cuando estamos en el teatro, por ejemplo, que tenemos esa distancia, tenemos a los actores allá, estamos en vivo, pero esta vez los tenemos tan cerca que un poco aproximarme al texto, a ver sus gestos, a encontrar la claridad en su palabra.
I love what Leyma is saying, right? So to translate, and Barbara, feel free, but I feel like Leyma's talking about how do we use Zoom? Yes. And there's a directness about sort of the richness of the language that the Spanish-speaking actors get to have, and the intimacy and immediacy of this platform versus the physical platform of a live theater. So I absolutely very.
Yeah, this is. Sorry, I was just going to say quickly, I mean, I think this is something that, again, when looking for the silver linings of Zoom, that a Shakespeare director, actually, Eli Simon, said to me last summer, right, in the middle of trying to get things off the ground on Zoom, right, that one of the advantages was that you could look for a focus on the language, right, and on the actor's face, even as you lost so much, right? So it is clearly a different emphasis. And I feel like if there was a difference in the productions, I think there was definitely more in the English language production of trying to sort of play against the limitations of Zoom, right? Everyone dancing and so on. Whereas, I think, as Leyma has said, she was really focusing more on the opportunity then to kind of zero in on the language. But again, so rich to see them both together.
And I do think also, this is just a guess, because of course I don't know Spanish well enough to know how good this play is in Spanish. But like there is I could imagine that there's so much you can get across with truly genius language. Just saying it true and saying it right. And that I could easily imagine that one could deliver this story with truly genius Spanish verse and just deliver it like that. And that the translation might be more likely to go towards how do we attack it as a broad comedy, and how do we deliver the story through all of our tools? Even though, of course, the translation is brilliant, but as we've already said, it is more colloquial, right? It's not trying to reach the heights of imagination that a writer like Shakespeare, or I would assume Sor Juana, might be able to reach in their greatest moments. And I wonder if that causes a slightly different attack. In the same way that delivering To Be or Not to Be might be a little bit different from delivering like a Jacobean monologue. Sorry, Jesse. Delivering like a monologue that is still great, but is more about forwarding the story than about great internal discovery. I don't know if that's fair or not, but it's something that occurs to me as we look at that script. We are getting towards sort of the lightning round. We've got a lot of sort of short answer questions. So here we go. Could someone please explain the name Tuna or Atun? I found the character and actor to be very funny. Does the name jibe with the Mediterranean mythological setting? Where'd that come from?
So I don't know, Rhonda, and if you've found anything in particular on the name. The one thing that comes to mind for me is that the tuna fisheries were places of misrules, right? So they were, that Cervantes has a picaresque novella in which the character is longing to embrace the picaresque life, and that's going to be done by going to the tuna fisheries. So there might be some of that, slippery, fishy, all those things. I don't know if you guys found anything else when you were looking at your introduction.
I haven't really seen scholarship on it, but I will say that looking at the play and actually listening to both of the plays or reading the plays, in this case maybe, there are a lot of references to water and like drowning. People are constantly saying that they're drowning in love, or they're drowning in sorrow, or they're a ship. Teseo saying he's on the waves. So there is a lot of that oceanic kind of language around. So I do wonder, it's actually interesting to think whether it might be related to like a Mediterranean type setting, but I don't know for sure. That would be interesting to explore in performance though, and make it more that kind of setting.
Yeah, and just to jump off Rhonda's point, in Comedia, sometimes the character of the servant has a funny name, a name that's not quite a real name, but rather like something that sounds funny. So in that case, Tuna is the sales servant, but also Racimo, Bini is Baco's servant. So not only they have like all funny names, but also the funny name goes in accordance of their master.
Are they supposed?
Yeah, sorry, Racimo means like a bunch of grapes, and like we translated that as Vinny in ours to kind of try to get across. That's because his master is Baco, which is the Spanish version of Bacchus. Yeah. Which is a play on the original myth. But also going off what Aina is saying, the servants also often are kind of related to appetite and things like that in sexual ways or for food, or Vinny's. I like the choice to have like Vinny get drunker in one of the performances as he goes along. So along with letting that make a lot of jokes that we took full advantage of with the names of tuna and things like that, it's also something that kind of speaks to what those characters are kind of bringing, as this sometimes like a parody of the higher plot with the higher class characters.
Yeah, and to not make this longer, sorry, usually the servants, because we mentioned the meta-theatrical element before, usually the servants are the ones bringing this meta-theatrical element to the table. They sort of act as a messenger between the audience and whatever is going on in the stage at that moment. So sometimes what they say actually might reflect what the audience might have been thinking at that moment, right? When we mentioned that Tuna in the second act is like, oh, this must be the second act of the comedy where like people come and go and there are confusions and dances and everything. So it's very likely that was also what the audience was thinking at that point. So so servants are also like this sort of standby character for the audience.
For actors, is it supposed to be at all sort of the comedy of manners style thing where like one is supposed to channel a tuna, like the way Touchstone is a truth teller in Shakespeare or anything like that? Like, is it just a comment for the audience, or is it a character of manners comment for the actor? Does that make any sense as a follow-up? No. Okay, next question. Hey, when you just take the L and move on. So the one person asked with some of the previous context, especially because there's Greek mythology in this, was Roman comedy an influence? Would that have been an influence for this play?
I think, again, in the same way that everyone is sort of drinking at the same fountain, right? So through Italian Renaissance comedies on, yes, I'm not sure there's any sort of direct link established or any specific evidence of one play at some point I was looking at, but it's sort of in the air, yeah.
And for the actors, what was your favorite part about the play? Line, character, episode, whatever you want.
I can go, Timothy. The ball was excellent, and I think like this idea that everyone gets to be equals in that moment, and no one knows. I mean, suddenly everyone has power in that situation, and no power. Just full-on confusion, and that's so much fun to play, even over Zoom. But I imagine physically on stage we would have a ball figuring that out, with all the masks and the shadows and all sorts of things going on.
I love how the daughters, the ladies, wielded their power through these love circles and triangles. But the doubling, I love it in Shakespeare, how the repetition of something changes and magnifies whatever's being repeated, but watching it happen through the daughters would repeat each other or share thoughts, and then the princes would, and it just kept happening back and forth, and I really enjoyed it. The more I got used to not worrying about what I was going to do, watching it play out, I really enjoyed it. It's very funny, which you just don't expect from a story about the labyrinth in any way. And yeah, we don't go to the labyrinth, but I didn't miss it ultimately. So yeah, that was my favorite thing, watching play out.
I love hearing you both, and what it makes me think of as we talk about, in a sense, the difference in doing these on Zoom is, yes, you get an intimacy, but Sor Juana has such a sense of theatricality and the genius of her juxtaposition of scenes and asides. I saw a question fly by about asides, and this is kind of this challenge on Zoom, because we had actors try to use that vocabulary vis-a-vis the camera, but right, and I see Leyma nodding, so gracias por eso, but that sense of how important where a body is on stage, that Sor Juana understands so deeply, how a mask can carry, how someone dancing on and dancing off can have an impact on narrative. That's the part that's hard to convey, because these are really, Sor Juana's play is like a handbook of theatrical craft. And you really want to embrace all the guidelines she's giving you. She's telling you, not unlike how Shakespeare does, how to stage the play, right? It's not stage directions, but it's actually within the text how people are moving. So anyway.
Even the fact that the music was part of the lines at the ball.
Right.
I mean, the fact that she's including the music in what we say is...
And they're playing with, they're talking about the measures and the measures, right? So we're playing with form within the form, which we tried very hard to capture on Zoom, but is challenging.
What are, maybe Leyma can answer this, but can we talk about the difference, if any, between Golden Age plays written by women versus male playwrights?
Leyma, te preguntan si puedes hablar un poquito de diferencias, si las hay, entre comedias escritas por hombres y por mujeres.
Es una pregunta estupenda. Y aquí vamos a entrar en la condición realmente social de la mujer en la época. Yo siempre, cuando por ejemplo hicimos un proyecto de investigación de los textos de las mujeres escritos en el Siglo de Oro, y aquí encontré a María de Saya Sotomayor, a Ana Caro, y ahora, para tener un tercer ejemplo, Sor Juana en esta lectura. Yo siento que hay una diferencia en la manera de abordar el texto y de lo que están diciendo, de la manera que lo están diciendo, las particularidades que empezamos a encontrar en los personajes femeninos. O sea, aunque estemos tratando comedias de capa y espada, como están escritas en la época por los hombres, la tendencia de la mujer en el color que le dan a estos personajes femeninos, en su discurso como individuos, en otra crisis social y miradas de una manera que casi no se podían escuchar, que casi no se representaban. O sea, sí creo que hay diferencia en la historia, de la manera que se dice y de la manera que prevalece la mirada del personaje femenino en el contexto social de la época.
So really pointing out that even though the female playwrights are working in the same genres, and some of those are very conventional, that there is something different about the female characters, and particularly their take on women's experience in the period.
Great. I'm going to ask two more questions, which we'll keep relatively quick, but I think we can get them in. Kira Curtis asks, what are your thoughts? We know Melia's. What are your thoughts on Zoom rehearsed readings performances as a way of adding to the digital archive of historical performance research? And is this different given the COVID era? I mean, it didn't exist before the COVID era. So, but yeah, what do we think that this has a place as a way to create a permanent record?
So, I mean, I think, you know, the relatively lower barrier, and I mean, I think Red Bull has been kind of leading the charge here, although I know there are issues with you know, keeping things available forever. But the relative ease of bringing together a cast and having a reading on Zoom with all its limitations, in the same way that you might do, you know, a reading in the room without time really for blocking or a lot of physicality. But now the reading can be seen by anyone everywhere. And if we can figure out the ask of the union by scholars whenever, at any time. I think one of the things it does is it gives us a chance to explore a broader range of plays, right? And sort of give them their moment in the sun, some of which might take and get productions, hint, hint, some of which might not, but nonetheless, right, they're being aired in a way.
Great. Well, then that leads into the final question. This is for the three scholars who've been working on this for so very long. It feels like a good way to end. After working so much on this translation, what was your reaction when you got to watch both of these readings?
It was really nice. It's always really fun to see, when you're translating, you try to see things in your head and try to figure out, like, will this work? Will this one work? Maybe this speech is too long. Maybe we should cut it down. Is this joke funny? And we have all these debates when we're translating collaboratively. But I was talking about this with Rhonda when I saw the Red Bull's performance, and I said, well, it's actually one thing to write a funny joke or to translate a funny joke, and it's actually like a completely different thing to see like that joke actually played out. And that's when you're like, oh yeah, that's actually really funny. It's like that moment of, oh yeah, like that's actually like a real thing, and real people are now saying those words that we all wrote in a Word document 4 months ago.
I wrote to Rafael in the chat when he asked the question, gratitude. I mean, it really feels like the other piece of the puzzle, when you're putting together the puzzle and it fits, because there's something about incredibly talented actors actually being able to work with a text and finding themselves at home in it, that is the greatest confirmation for the work that we're doing. So that is truly amazing.
Yeah, and just, echoing what they both say, and also that we've been working on it a long time, but we're not done. We're definitely still going to keep changing it in light, and we really view it as a partnership with the performers whenever we get to see it done, and we want to make it better for them, and we also, just want to make it better in general. And seeing the two performances was great because we can see different takes on kind of similar situations and similar characters, and give us more ideas, which are always good, of how this could be played, which is a gift that all of the theater people give us every time we can see it. So thank you very much.
Well, speaking of seeing actors take your script and bring it home and make it feel at home, thank you all of my guests tonight and all of the people in the audience. This space, which was so foreign to us 2 years ago, is, for better or worse, feeling more and more familiar, and at least as a way to be home with people who are in theater and working on these projects together. And it is such a joy to share the room with you and with all of you watching. The next thing that we have going is this coming Monday. We don't stop at Red Bull. We have a podversation where I will be hosting the wonderful Raphael Nash Thompson and artistic director Jesse Berger to talk about Pericles and Gower. It is launching a month of Pericles related materials. There's a reading, there's a bunch of seminars. It's all over the website. And so that is what will be coming up next for Red Bull. And when this meeting ends, it is so sudden. I am saying this for both the attendees and the panelists. It always feels bad because the only way to end it is just to end the meeting. So thank you again, all of you, for coming and spending this hour with us. It was such a joy, and I can't wait for the next time that we get to collaborate. Thank you all.
Thank you to Red Bull. Thank you to UCLA Translation.